The rain fell in relentless sheets over Detroit, Michigan, a city that seemed to wear its scars like a badge of endurance. In a crumbling apartment building on the edge of Corktown, where the streetlights flickered and the sidewalks cracked under the weight of forgotten promises, Sofia Nelson sat on a sagging couch, her silhouette framed by the dim glow of a single lamp. The air was thick with the scent of damp plaster and baby powder's faint, lingering sweetness. Outside, the storm pressed against the warped window panes, each droplet a reminder of the world's indifference to her struggle. Inside, the silence was not absolute. It was punctured by the soft, hungry whimper of her son Ethan, stirring in his crib across the room. Sofia's hands rested on her knees, her fingers tracing the frayed hem of her sweater, as if seeking some anchor in the unraveling fabric of her life. At 32, her deep brown skin bore the faint lines of exhaustion, etched by nights spent whispering assurances to herself that tomorrow would be better. Her curls, once meticulously styled, now fell loosely around her shoulders, defiant in their rebellion against the cheap elastic band she'd used to tame them. She was a woman who had once dreamed of laboratories and breakthroughs, and her degree in biochemistry was a distant memory of a life interrupted by betrayal and circumstance. Now her world was this apartment, these 4 peeling walls, and the fragile heartbeat of her 18-month-old son. The refrigerator in the corner hummed a tired protest, its shelves bare except for a half-empty jar of mustard and a single apple. The tin of infant formula on the counter had been scraped clean hours ago, and Ethan had fallen asleep with a bottle diluted with water, a makeshift solution that twisted Sofia's heart with guilt. She had whispered to him in the dark, her voice soft as a prayer. "It's enough, baby. It's enough." But the lie tasted bitter, a sharp edge that cut through the quiet. She knew it wasn't enough, not for Ethan, not for the dreams she still carried like a bruise beneath her skin. Her phone lay on the coffee table, its cracked screen glowing faintly in the gloom. Sofia's thumb hovered over the contact list, pausing at the name she dreaded calling James, her older brother. He was a mechanic in Flint, a man hardened by years of scraping by. He had helped her before, but never without a lecture on responsibility or a reminder of the debts that hung between them, like unspoken accusations. Pride was a luxury Sofia could no longer afford, not when Ethan's cries echoed in her ears, not when the emptiness of their pantry felt like a living thing, threatening to swallow them both. Her chest tightened as she typed out the message, each word a surrender. "James, I'm sorry to ask again. I need $50 for formula. Ethan's almost out. I'll pay you back on Friday, promise." Her hands trembled as she hit send, the act feeling like a confession of failure. She didn't double-check the number she couldn't bear to linger on the shame of it. Closing her eyes, she pressed her forehead into her palms, letting the world's weight settle on her shoulders. The rain outside grew louder, a relentless drumbeat, mocking her fragility. 5 minutes passed each second, stretching into eternity, until her phone buzzed a sharp vibration that jolted her heart. Sofia's breath caught hope, flaring too quickly, too recklessly. She expected James's reluctant agreement, or perhaps another sermon on pulling herself together. Instead, the message on the screen made her stomach lurch. "I think you meant to send this to someone else." Her heart plummeted. One wrong digit, she hadn't texted James at all. She had sent her plea to a stranger. Panic surged hot and sharp, burning through the fog of exhaustion. Her fingers flew across the screen. "I'm so sorry. Wrong number. Please ignore this." Embarrassment mingled with the shame she already carried, a heavy cloak she could not shake off. She tossed the phone onto the couch and pulled a threadbare blanket tighter around herself, as if it could shield her from the weight of another mistake. In the bedroom, Ethan stirred again, his whimper softening into the shallow breaths of sleep. Sofia's eyes drifted to the window, where the rain blurred the world beyond into a gray, unforgiving haze. She told herself it was over a fleeting error that would dissolve into the night. What she could not know, what she had no way of knowing, was that 300 miles away, in a glass-walled penthouse overlooking Chicago's glittering skyline, the man who had received her message was staring at his phone with an intensity he hadn't felt in years. Charles Walker was a name that carried weight in the world of power and privilege. A 40-year-old billionaire whose empire, Biotech Solutions, reshaped the landscape of medical innovation. His office, perched on the 75th floor of a Chicago skyscraper, was a cathedral of steel and glass, its walls reflecting the city's restless pulse. Charles was a man of precision, his tailored suits as immaculate as the contracts he signed, his blue eyes sharp enough to cut through lies. Yet beneath the polished exterior was a solitude that clung to him like a shadow. He had built his fortune from nothing, a former Army medic who turned battlefield grit into biomedical patents. But success had come at a cost. His private phone, a number known only to a dwindling circle of family, never received stray messages until now. Sofia's words glowed on the screen. James. I'm sorry to ask again. I need $50 for formula. Ethan's almost out. I'll pay you back on Friday. Promise. They were not just words, but a raw, unfiltered glimpse into a life teetering on the edge. Charles reread them, his jaw tightening as he traced the contours of her desperation. Ethan's almost out. The name stirred something buried deep, a memory of his younger sister Emily, who had died at 19, her body ravaged by a disease their family couldn't afford to treat. That loss had driven him to build biotech to ensure no one else would face such helplessness. Yet here it was again, in a stranger's plea, a mother's quiet surrender. Most nights, Charles would have deleted the message. Strangers were risks, mistakes were liabilities, and his world was one of calculated moves. But tonight, the rain against his penthouse windows seemed to echo the rhythm of Sofia's words. He typed a response, his fingers steady but deliberate. Is your baby going to be okay? He hit send before he could reconsider, and the act was foreign to him, as was the vulnerability in her message. Back in Detroit, Sofia stared at the reply, her breath catching in her throat. Is your baby going to be okay? The question was unsettling in its simplicity, a stranger's concern cutting through the walls she had built around herself. Her first instinct was to block the number to shut out this unknown voice that dared to see her weakness. But something in the words held her straightforward, unadorned, yet heavy with care. She typed back her fingers, hesitant. We'll manage. Sorry again. She pressed send and set the phone down, determined to end the exchange. The response came swiftly, as if he had been waiting. I can help. No strings. Sofia scoffed, a humorless sound that broke the silence of her apartment. Help from strangers came with invisible hooks, and she had learned long ago that trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. Thanks, but I don't take money from strangers, she replied, her words firm despite the tremble in her hands. Smart policy, came the answer. I'm Charles now, not a stranger. The message stopped her cold. He had given his name a small offering that felt oddly intimate in its simplicity. She pushed the thought aside. People didn't give freely, not in her world where every kindness had a price. Hours later, as Ethan drifted into restless sleep, Sofia sat in the dim quiet, the glow of her phone casting shadows across her face. Against her better judgment, she did something she never imagined. She sent her Venmo handle, her hands shaking as she typed. She told herself it was foolish that he would send nothing or exploit her moment of weakness. 3 seconds later, her phone buzzed. Her eyes widened as she opened the app, certain she had misread the notification. But there it was, $10,000 received from Charles Walker. Her breath faltered. She refreshed the app twice, as if the numbers might vanish like a mirage. $10,000. It was more than she had seen in years, and she couldn't comprehend it. Her fingers moved in disbelief. "This is too much. I only needed $50. The reply was instant. "It's already yours. No catch. One less thing to worry about." Sofia's vision blurred, tears spilling down her cheeks before she could stop them. She hadn't cried when her ex Ethan's father abandoned her during pregnancy. She hadn't cried when she lost her job at a small biotech firm, or when the bills piled higher than her hopes. But this unasked-for kindness broke her not because of the money, but because someone somewhere had seen her desperation and chosen compassion over judgment. She pressed her hands to her face, her sobs muffled so as not to wake Ethan. The rain outside softened, as if the storm had paused to witness her unraveling. In Chicago, Charles stood at his penthouse window, the city sprawling beneath him in a sea of flickering lights. Sofia's message, "This is too much," glowed on his phone, a quiet rebuke to his guarded world. He didn't know the texture of her life beyond those desperate words. Yet something about her refusal, her insistence on needing only $50, stirred a part of him he had long buried. He typed one final message, "Take care of Ethan." Then he set the phone down, the weight of his own solitude settling heavier than before. Back in Detroit, Sofia lay awake staring at the ceiling as Ethan's peaceful breaths filled the room. The $10,000 sat untouched in her account, a number too vast to feel real. She wanted to return it to reject the vulnerability it exposed, but she couldn't not when it meant formula for Ethan, a month's rent, a chance to breathe. Who was this man? This Charles Walker, who gave so freely to a stranger? Fear mingled with awe as she traced the edges of the unknown. In the quiet of the night, a whisper stirred within her, fragile but undeniable. This wasn't an accident. It was the beginning of something she could neither predict nor resist. The morning broke over Detroit with a reluctant grayness, the clouds hanging low, as if unwilling to let the city shake off the weight of its storms. The air in Sophia Nelson's apartment was heavy with the scent of coffee, brewed from the last grounds in the canister. She sat at a small scarred kitchen table, her chin resting in her palm, her eyes fixed on the cracked screen of her phone. The notification from the night before still glowed there, $10,000 received from Charles Walker. The words felt like a dream she didn't dare trust, a fragile thread that could snap under the scrutiny of daylight. Ethan babbled softly from his high chair, his tiny fingers clutching a plastic spoon, oblivious to the storm of questions in his mother's mind. Sophia's reflection in the chipped mirror above the sink showed a woman between gratitude and suspicion. Her deep brown skin glowed faintly under the weak sunlight filtering through the blinds, but her eyes carried the weight of sleeplessness. She had spent the night pacing her bare feet, tracing the worn floorboards, wrestling with the impossibility of Charles's gift. $10,000 was not just money. It was a lifeline, a promise of stability. She hadn't known since before Ethan was born. But it was also a question that gnawed at her. Why would a stranger, a billionaire no less, care about her and her son? In her world, kindness came with strings, and trust was a gamble she had lost too many times. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets of Corktown slick and shimmering under the muted light. Sophia's phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. A new message from Charles. "I hope Ethan slept well." The words were simple, almost tender, and struck her like a note played out of tune. She typed back, her fingers hesitant. "He did. Thank you, but I need to know why you're doing this." The reply came swiftly. "I've known what it's like to have nothing, and no one should go through that alone." The confession, brief as it was, carried a weight that made her pause. She wanted to ask more, to unravel the man behind the words. But Ethan's sudden cry pulled her back to the present. She lifted her son from the high chair, his warmth grounding her as she rocked him gently. His small fists tugged at her sweater, his dark eyes wide with curiosity. "We're okay, little man," she whispered, kissing his forehead. But the emptiness of the formula tin loomed in her mind, a reminder that the money in her account was still untouchable until she knew it was safe. She couldn't walk into a store and spend it, not yet, not until she understood who Charles Walker was and what he wanted. A sharp knock at the door startled her, so sudden that Ethan flinched in her arms. No one came to her apartment unannounced. The landlord sent curt texts, and the neighbors kept their distance, their own struggles leaving little room for camaraderie. The knock came again, firmer, insistent. Sofia set Ethan gently in his crib, pulling on a faded hoodie before approaching the door. Through the peephole, she saw a delivery worker in a navy uniform, a clipboard in one hand, and a dolly stacked with boxes behind him. Her heart pounded as she opened the door, the hinges creaking in protest. "Delivery for Sofia Nelson," the man said, his tone brisk but indifferent. She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. "Need your signature." Her hand shook as she scrawled her name, the pen slipping slightly against the paper. The worker wheeled the boxes into her cramped living room, stacking them neatly against the wall before leaving without a word. The door clicked shut, and silence returned, heavy with anticipation. Sofia stood frozen, staring at the pile of boxes as if they might vanish if she blinked. Her breath quickened. She crouched, tearing at the tape with trembling fingers. The first box revealed cans of infant formula, premium brands she had only seen in advertisements, their labels promising nutrients she could never afford. The second held diapers, wipes, bottles, and tiny clothes, their fabrics soft and vibrant, chosen with a care that felt foreign to her world. The third contained organic puree packets, jars of baby food, and teething toys shaped like stars and moons. By the time she reached the fourth box, her hands shook so badly she had to pause, pressing her palms to her eyes as she whispered, "Oh my God." A small envelope lay at the bottom of the final box, beneath layers of tissue paper. Her name was written across it in steady, deliberate handwriting. She opened it carefully, pulling out a single card. "Ethan deserves better than just getting by. Charles." No logo, no address, only a signature that carried the weight of a promise. Sofia's chest tightened, gratitude and suspicion tangling into a knot she couldn't unravel. She sank onto the worn carpet, Ethan's cries softening as she lifted him into her lap. A new bottle, full and warm, pressed to his lips for the first time in days. Her tears fell silently onto his curls, the world blurring around her. Hours passed before she touched the boxes again, their presence in the corner of the room, like a dream too vivid to dismiss. When Ethan finally slept, Sofia returned to the kitchen table, her phone casting a soft glow in the dimness. She opened a browser and typed, "Charles Walker." The results flooded the screen faster than she was ready for. Charles Walker, CEO of Biotech Solutions, net worth $15 billion. A man who had built an empire on biomedical patents, his name whispered in boardrooms and financial journals. The press called him the Phantom Titan, elusive and untouchable, avoiding interviews and public life. There were a few photographs, a stern figure exiting a Senate hearing, his jaw set. Another at a charity gala, his expression cold, distant. He didn't look like kindness. He looked like a man who lived in a world where people like Sofia existed only as statistics. Her breath trembled as she stared at his image, the sharp lines of his face starkly contrasting the softness of his actions. This wasn't luck. It was something else, something deliberate. Her fingers hovered over the phone, and before she could stop herself, she typed, "Why are you doing this?" The message felt reckless, a challenge to the man who had stepped into her life uninvited. The reply came quickly. "I know what losing someone you can't save is like. No child should feel that pain." The words struck her like a quiet blow, unpolished but authentic. She typed back, her heart racing, "I don't want your pity." His response was immediate. "It's not pity, it's recognition." Sofia leaned against the wall, closing her eyes as the word settled into her bones. Recognition. It carried a weight she wasn't ready to bear, suggesting that someone saw her not as a failure, but as a person fighting to survive. The next morning, another package arrived, smaller but heavier with meaning. Inside was a single item, a soft gray blanket embroidered with Ethan's name in delicate silver thread. The fabric smelled faintly of lavender, untouched by the hardship that defined her days. Sofia sank onto the couch, burying her face in the blanket, her knees weakening under its implication. This was no longer a chance encounter. It was something deeper, something that frightened and thrilled her in equal measure. Her phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with a new message. "Do you work?" The question landed like a stone in her chest, stirring memories of a life she had lost. She hesitated, her fingers tracing the blanket's threads. "I did before my company folded and daycare closed. I studied biochemistry and worked in diagnostics at a small firm called NextGen. Not anymore." She expected the conversation to end there, for Charles to retreat to his world of glass towers and billion-dollar deals. Instead, his reply was swift. "I found your LinkedIn profile. You interned at NextGen and worked on diagnostic research. Come to Biotech Solutions in Chicago tomorrow at 11 a.m. Ask for Clara Bennett. No strings, just a conversation." Sofia's heart stopped. She stared at the words, at the name of a company that held half the biomedical patents in the country, at an invitation that felt impossible. "You're offering me a job?" She typed, disbelief plain in her words. "I'm offering you a chance to take one back," he replied. Her phone slipped from her hands, landing softly on the blanket. She pressed her palms to her face, her breath shallow. A chance. That's what he called it, a chance to reclaim a piece of the life she had lost. But why her? Why this man, this billionaire stranger, who seemed to see her when no one else did? The morning of Sofia's visit to Biotech Solutions dawned with a nervous stillness. The gray skies over Detroit, breaking open to spill faint golden light across the city's tired streets. She stood before the small mirror above her dresser, her reflection, a study in contrasts, dark eyes framed by fatigue, her deep brown skin catching the soft glow of dawn. Her hair was pulled back neatly, though a few curls escaped at her temples, defiant as always. She wore her cleanest jeans, a thrifted blouse ironed twice, and a blazer that pinched at the shoulders, a relic from interviews 2 years ago when her future still felt within reach. Ethan rested against her chest in a baby carrier, his tiny hand tugging at her silver necklace. "Just for today, Ethan," she whispered, kissing his fingers. "Let's pretend we belong." The bus ride to Chicago was a blur of shifting thoughts, the vehicle rattling along the interstate as Detroit's crumbling edges gave way to the sleek skyline of the windy city. Sofia clutched the carrier strap tighter, her heart pounding with each mile. She couldn't shake the feeling of being an interloper, a woman stepping into a world that wasn't hers. When she arrived at the biotech tower, she stopped short. The building loomed like a shard of glass, piercing the sky, its surface shimmering in silver and steel. The glass doors parted automatically, ushering her into a lobby of polished stone and soaring skylights. The air hummed with efficiency, the click of heels, the murmur of voices, the whisper of papers behind sleek desks. Sofia felt smaller than ever, the weight of her worn shoes and faded blazer pressing against her. A receptionist looked up, her smile warm but professional. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Her eyes softened at Ethan, who gazed curiously at the glittering space. "I'm here to see Clara Bennett," Sofia said, her voice low. "My name is Sofia Nelson." Recognition flickered across the woman's face, unsettling Sofia further. "You're expected on the 40th floor," she said brightly. "Miss Bennett will meet you at the elevator." The word expected echoed in Sofia's mind, a foreign concept in a life where she had long ceased to be anticipated anywhere. The elevator ride was smooth too fast, and each floor number lit up with quiet precision. Ethan babbled, pressing his hand against the cool metal panel. When the doors opened, Clara Bennett stood waiting, a woman in her 40s, with sleek black hair and a tailored suit. Her smile was kind, easing Sofia's tension. Clara said, "Mr. Walker is in meetings." Her voice is professional but warm. "He asked me to show you around." Sofia followed her down a hallway, lined with glass offices, where men and women moved with the polished ease of those who belonged. The weight of their glances, some curious, some skeptical, pressed against her, a reminder of her difference, her blackness, her motherhood in a space built for power. Clara stopped before a conference room, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Chicago's skyline. Inside was a nursery, a crib draped with soft blankets, a changing table stocked with supplies and plush rugs scattered with toys. Sofia's hand flew to her mouth, tears pricking her eyes. "He thought it might help you feel comfortable," Clara said gently. Sofia's voice broke. "Why would he do this?" Clara's gaze met hers steadily. "Because he knows what it's like to walk in alone." The words sank deep, stirring something Sofia couldn't name. 20 minutes later, she sat in a smaller meeting room, Ethan asleep in the carrier beside her. The door opened, and Charles Walker entered. His presence filled the space, tall, broad-shouldered, his navy suit sharp against the lean lines of his body. His blue eyes held storms and silence, a faint stubble along his jaw, hinting at sleepless nights. He was precisely as the world described him, untouchable, commanding. Yet there was a weariness in his gaze, a vulnerability the photographs had never captured. "Sofia," he said, her name rolling from his tongue like a familiar melody. "Thank you for coming." She stood awkwardly, unsure of her hands. "I wasn't sure I should," she admitted. "You came anyway," he said, his voice steady but not unkind. "That's what matters." He sat across from her, his gaze piercing yet gentle. "Before we discuss anything, I want to be clear, you owe me nothing. This isn't a test or a rescue. I believe in investing in people and see something in you worth investing in." Sofia's throat tightened. She had braced for judgment, for strings attached to his generosity. But his words, direct and unadorned, disarmed her. "Why me?" she whispered. Charles looked down at his hands, then back to her. "Because you didn't ask for a handout. You fought for your son even when it cost you everything. That's rare." Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Sofia nodded, her voice steady, despite the storm in her chest. "I'll take the chance." And in that moment, as Chicago's skyline gleamed beyond the glass, she felt the first stirrings of hope, a fragile, dangerous thing, but hers nonetheless. The Chicago skyline shimmered under a veil of dawn, its glass towers catching the first light like sentinels guarding secrets. Inside the Biotech Solutions Tower, Sofia Nelson stepped off the elevator onto the 40th floor, her heart a quiet drumbeat against the stillness of the morning. Ethan rested against her chest in his carrier, his soft breaths a grounding rhythm as she crossed the marble lobby, her new security badge gleaming with her name in bold black letters. The weight of it felt foreign, a fragile claim to a world she had never imagined entering. At 32, Sofia was no stranger to survival, but this walking into a corporate empire with her son in her arms was a different kind of courage. The nursery Clara Bennett had shown her days ago stood ready, its soft blankets and cheerful toys, a stark contrast to the sterile efficiency of the offices beyond. Sofia settled Ethan into the crib, his tiny hand clutching a plush star as he gurgled contentedly. She kissed his forehead, her lips lingering to anchor herself to the one truth that never wavered: she was here for him. The glass walls of the nursery reflected her image, a woman with deep brown skin, her curls tamed into a neat bun, her thrifted blouse and too tight blazer, a quiet defiance against the polished world around her. She felt the weight of every glance from passing colleagues, their eyes flickering with curiosity or something sharper, which reminded her she was an outsider in this kingdom of glass and steel. Her office was a modest sanctuary, a sleek desk flanked by dual monitors that hummed softly as if waiting for her touch. Clara had provided her login credentials, and Sofia sat her fingers hovering over the keyboard. It had been over a year since she last worked in a professional setting. Her days at NextGen were spent analyzing diagnostic data, now a distant memory. She feared her skills had rusted dulled by months of scraping by, but as the audit system loaded, a familiar rhythm stirred within her. Spreadsheets unfolded like maps to forgotten territories, numbers whispering truths she had once known by heart. Her mind clicked into gear, tracing patterns and deviations with a precision that surprised her. The morning passed in a blur of reconciliations and vendor logs, each file a thread in the intricate tapestry of biotech's finances. Sofia's focus was absolute, her pen scratching notes on a legal pad as she cross-referenced invoices. Then in the quiet hum of the office, she noticed the first anomaly: a series of payments to a vendor named Apex Innovations. Small sums scattered across departments, always under the threshold that would trigger an automatic review. The amounts varied $200 here, $400 there, blending seamlessly into the background noise of legitimate transactions. But to Sofia's trained eye, they were too deliberate, too perfectly timed. She copied the vendor code into a private folder, her pulse quickening as she traced the payments to project codes that didn't exist. She leaned back, her breath shallow. This wasn't a mistake. It was a strategy, a quiet siphoning of funds hidden in plain sight. The realization sent a chill through her, not just for the discovery, but for what it implied. Someone inside biotech was orchestrating this, someone who knew the system intimately. Her thoughts were interrupted by a shadow falling across her desk. She looked up to find Charles Walker standing at the glass partition, his navy suit impeccable, his blue eyes sharp with an intensity that made her heart stutter. He didn't knock or announce himself. He watched his presence commanding even in silence. Settling in, he asked, his voice low, carrying a warmth that softened the edges of his authority. Sofia glanced at her monitor, steadying herself. "I haven't broken anything yet." His lips curved into the faintest smile, a rare crack in his guarded demeanor. "Give it time." She turned the screen slightly, showing him the open folder. "I'm starting with the third quarter reports. Some vendor payouts don't align with project records." Charles tilted his head, his expression shifting to one of quiet thoughtfulness. "You found that already?" She shrugged, her voice steady, despite the flutter in her chest. "They're not well hidden." His gaze locked with hers, searching, assessing. "Anything feel off to you?" Sofia hesitated, her fingers tapping lightly against the desk. "I've only been in the system a few hours, but yes, either someone's sloppy or hiding something in the noise." His jaw tightened, a muscle flickering beneath the faint stubble. "You don't have to dig deep yet. Start at the surface." Sofia's chin lifted, a spark of defiance in her eyes. "I don't do surface level." A beat of silence stretched between them, charged with unspoken respect. Charles nodded once. Neither do I. He left as quietly as he had come, but his presence lingered a warmth that unsettled her. Sofia turned back to her screen, her mind racing. The anomalies were no accident. They were the work of someone deliberate, someone powerful. She saved her findings in an encrypted file, her instincts whispering caution. The office hummed around her colleagues, moving through their tasks with practiced ease. But Sofia felt the weight of unseen eyes. She glanced toward the nursery, where Ethan slept peacefully, his small chest rising and falling. For his sake, she would keep digging, but the path ahead felt shadowed dangerous. By afternoon, Clara appeared with a tray of lunch, grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, and a glass of iced tea. "You didn't order," she said, setting it down with a smile. "Eat. You'll need it." Sofia blinked, startled by the gesture. In her old jobs, she had been invisible, her hunger unnoticed. Someone had thought of her here, and the kindness felt comforting and disorienting. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, until her screen pinged with a new message from Charles. "Keep this between us. If you find something that doesn't look right, bring it to me. No one else." Her breath caught. She glanced at the door, half expecting him to be there, but the hallway was empty. "You expect me to find something?" she typed. His reply was immediate. "I hope you see things others won't." Her heart thudded. She looked at Ethan through the glass, his tiny form curled around a plush toy. For the first time in months, Sofia felt a spark of purpose, a sense that she was no longer chasing life from behind. But with purpose came risk, and as the day drew to a close, she caught a glimpse of a man in a tailored gray suit lingering near her office. Edward Pierce. The CFO smiled, his smile polished but cold, his eyes sharp as they flicked toward her. He didn't speak, but his presence shivered down her spine. Sofia gathered her things, kissed Ethan's forehead, and left the tower, the weight of her discovery pressing heavier with each step. That night in her Detroit apartment, Sofia sat at her kitchen table, the glow of her laptop the only light in the room. Ethan slept in the next room, his breath a soft counterpoint to the city's distant hum. She opened the encrypted file, her notes meticulous, and each anomaly was a larger puzzle piece. The vendor payments were not random. They were a pattern, a quiet theft that had gone unnoticed for months, perhaps years. Her fingers trembled as she wrote to Charles. "I need 5 minutes tomorrow. It's important." His reply came swiftly. "My office, 8 a.m. Sofia closed her laptop, her heart racing. She was stepping into a game she didn't fully understand, but for Ethan, and for the man who had given her a chance, she would play it. The Chicago dawn painted the Biotech Solutions Tower in hues of gold and amber, its glass facade a mirror to the city's restless ambition. Sofia Nelson arrived early, her steps echoing across the marble lobby as she carried Ethan his warmth, a quiet anchor against the storm brewing in her chest. The security badge clipped to her blouse felt heavier today, symbolizing her fragile place in this world of power and precision. She settled Ethan in the nursery, his laughter filling the space as he reached for a toy moon, oblivious to the weight of the meeting ahead. Sofia smoothed her blazer, its seams straining slightly, and steeled herself for what lay beyond the glass doors. Charles Walker's office was a study in minimalism, its floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city like a living canvas. He sat at a desk, stripped bare except for a tablet and a single photograph angled away from view. When Sofia entered, he glanced up, his blue eyes sharp, but softened by a flicker of concern. "You said it's essential," he said, his voice low, inviting her to sit. Sofia placed a flash drive on the desk, her hands steady, despite the tremor in her pulse. "It's not confirmed, but it's enough to raise questions." Charles plugged the drive into his tablet, scrolling through her files, vendor codes, Ghost projects, payments that vanished into shell accounts. His expression shifted from concentration to confirmation, a muscle tightening in his jaw. "You pulled this from the third quarter?" he asked. Sofia nodded. "It spans earlier quarters too. The vendor, Apex Innovations, doesn't exist. The payments route through a Delaware shell account are masked as small invoices." Charles leaned back, exhaling through his nose. "It's clean. Too clean." Sofia's voice softened, cautious. "Whoever did this knows your system intimately." He met her gaze, his eyes darker than she'd seen before. "I've suspected something for months, but finance dismissed it as noise. I don't trust outside firms, not when I don't know who's loyal." Sofia's chest tightened. She understood isolation the way it hollowed you out, made trust a dangerous gamble. "So what now?" she asked. Charles's voice dropped steady, but edged with steel. "Keep digging quietly. No emails, no names. If anyone asks, you're reconciling back-end records." Sofia tilted her head, her tone firm. "You're asking me to investigate your own company." His gaze didn't waver. "I'm asking you to find the truth." Silence fell thick with unspoken stakes. "And if it's ugly?" she whispered. Charles leaned closer, his voice unwavering. "Then we deal with it together." The words lingered as Sofia returned to her office, her mind replaying the intensity of his gaze. She worked through the morning, her focus unrelenting as she traced the vendor payments further, each discovery a thread in a web she couldn't yet see. But the air in the biotech tower had shifted, a subtle tension coiling through the hallways. She felt it in the glances of colleagues, their smiles stiffening when she passed, their whispers trailing her like shadows. As a black woman with a child in tow, Sofia was no stranger to scrutiny, but this was different, sharper, more pointed. She caught fragments of conversations in the cafeteria. "She's the CEO's pet project, and what's a single mom doing in finance?" The words stung, burrowing deep, but she held her head high, Ethan's laughter her shield. By noon, Edward Pierce made his presence known. The CFO appeared at her desk, his gray suit immaculate, his smile a polished blade. "Miss Nelson," he said, his voice smooth as silk, "quite the privilege bringing your son into these walls." Sofia forced a polite nod, her fingers tightening around her pen. "I'm grateful for the opportunity, Mr. Pierce." His eyes flicked to the nursery, then to her, sharp and calculating. "Opportunities are fragile things. They don't last forever." The words hung in the air, a veiled warning that chilled her. He walked away, his shoes clicking against the polished floor, leaving Sofia with a racing pulse. That evening, as the office emptied and the city lights flickered to life, Sofia lingered at her desk, combing through procurement records. The anomalies grew clearer, millions siphoned over months, hidden in plain sight. She encrypted her findings, her heart pounding with what she uncovered. A shadow fell across her office, and she looked up to find Charles leaning against the glass partition, his jacket-gone sleeves rolled to his forearms. "You're here late," he said, his voice soft but edged with concern. Sofia glanced at Ethan, asleep in the nursery. "So are you." They shared a quiet smile, brief but heavy with understanding. Sofia held out a flash drive. The approvals tie back to Pierce's team, but not directly. He's using ghost credentials to cover the trail. Charles took the drive, his fingers brushing hers, the contact sending a jolt through her. He studied her, his eyes searching. "You realize what this means?" Sofia nodded. "He's stealing from you and planning something bigger." Charles's jaw tightened. "Keep digging, but be careful. Pierce is dangerous when cornered." The warning followed Sofia home to Detroit, where she sat at her kitchen table, the city's hum a distant echo. Ethan slept in the next room, his plush star clutched tightly. She opened her laptop, the glow illuminating her weary face as she documented every detail. The truth was taking shape, but so was the danger. A message from an unknown number buzzed her phone. Be careful about what you're looking for. Not every door leads out. Her breath caught her eyes, darting to the window where the night pressed close. She locked the door, her hands trembling, and held Ethan's blanket. Its lavender scent, a fragile shield against the shadows closing in. The Chicago morning unfurled in a cascade of silver light, the Biotech Solutions Tower, standing as a sentinel against the city's restless pulse. Sophia Nelson stepped into the 40th floor nursery, her heart a quiet knot of resolve and unease. Ethan, her 18-month-old son, babbled softly as she settled him into the crib, his tiny fingers curling around a plush moon that glowed faintly in the morning sun. Sophia's reflection in the glass walls caught her eye, her deep brown skin radiant despite the fatigue etched into her features. Her curls pulled tightly into a bun, her thrifted blouse and blazer a fragile armor against the world she now navigated. The security badge clipped to her chest felt like a tether binding her to a place where she was both welcomed and watched. The anonymous message from the previous night lingered in her mind. Careful what you're looking for. Not every door leads out. It had followed her from Detroit, a shadow that clung to the edges of her thoughts. She hadn't told Charles Walker yet, not wanting to burden him with her fear, but the weight of it pressed against her as she moved to her office. The sleek desk and glowing monitors awaited a battlefield of numbers and secrets. Sophia opened her encrypted files, and the vendor anomalies she had uncovered are now forming a more precise pattern. Millions siphoned through ghost accounts, orchestrated with a precision that points to someone high in biotech's hierarchy. Edward Pierce, the CFO, was her prime suspect, his polished smile and sharp eyes haunting her every discovery. Her fingers danced across the keyboard, tracing payments to Apex Innovations through a labyrinth of shell accounts in Delaware. Each transaction was a whisper of betrayal, a theft hidden in the noise of corporate routine. Sophia's focus was unrelenting, her biochemistry training, lending her an eye for patterns others overlooked. But the office around her buzzed with a new tension. Colleagues' glances lingered too long, their conversations faltering when she passed. As a black single mother in a sea of tailored suits, Sophia was no stranger to scrutiny, but these whispers carried a different edge, accusatory, laced with suspicion. She overheard fragments in the hallway. She's too close to the CEO, and what's she doing here? The words cut deeper than she admitted, each a reminder of her precarious place. By mid-morning, Edward Pierce made his presence felt. He appeared at her office door, leaning casually against the frame, his gray suit immaculate, his smile a blade thinly veiled. "Miss Nelson," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "You're making quite an impression. Not everyone gets such personal attention from Charles." Sophia's grip tightened on her pen, her voice steady despite the tremor in her pulse. "I'm here to do my job, Mr. Pierce." His eyes flicked to the nursery, where Ethan played, then back to her. "Of course. But success here demands discretion. Curiosity can be costly." The warning hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. He left without another word, his footsteps echoing down the hall. Sophia's breath shuddered as she turned back to her screen. Edward's words were no idle threat. They were a line drawn, a challenge to her resolve. She saved her findings, encrypting them twice, and sent a message to Charles' need to talk. Now. His reply was immediate. "My office, 10 minutes. The walk to the 75th floor felt like crossing a battlefield, the glass walls reflecting her image, a woman carrying the weight of secrets and a mother's fierce determination. Charles's office was a sanctuary of minimalism, its windows framing Chicago's skyline in hues of steel and gold. He stood as she entered, his navy suit sharp, his blue eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her heart stutter. "You're shaken," he said, his voice low-laced with concern. Sofia slid the flash drive across his desk. Pierce stopped by. He didn't say it outright, but he knows I'm looking into the accounts. Charles's jaw tightened as he plugged in the drive, scrolling through her findings. "He's moving faster than I expected," he murmured. Sofia's voice was steady but urgent. "He threatened me, Charles. Not directly, but it was clear. He mentioned Ethan." Charles's eyes darkened, a storm brewing behind them. "He won't touch you," he said, his voice edged with steel. "Not while I'm here." The certainty in his tone sent a shiver through her, not of fear, but of something startlingly close to safety. She wanted to believe him, but the anonymous message burned in her mind. "There's more," she said, her voice dropping. "Last night I got a text from an unknown number. It said to stop looking or I'd regret it." Charles leaned forward, his hands gripping the desk. "Please, show me." Sofia pulled up the message on her phone, the words glowing like a warning. Charles's expression hardened, but his voice softened. "You don't have to do this alone, Sofia. I won't let him hurt you or Ethan." Her throat tightened, gratitude and fear tangling within her. "Why are you protecting me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Charles looked down at his hands, then back to her, his gaze raw. "Because I've lost too much to stand by and watch someone else suffer. My sister Emily died because we couldn't afford her treatment. I see her in you, in Ethan. I can't undo the past, but I can fight for you now." The confession struck Sofia like a quiet blow, unraveling the walls she had built around her heart. She nodded, unable to find words, the air thick with unspoken trust between them. That evening, Sofia stayed late, the office floors above and below emptying into silence. Ethan slept in the nursery, his plush moon tucked under his chin. She combed through procurement records, each discovery tightening the noose around Edward Pierce. The payments were not just theft. They were a strategy, a slow bleed designed to weaken biotech from within. As she saved her work, a flicker of movement caught her eye. Across the hall, Edward stood, his silhouette sharp against the glass. He didn't approach, but his gaze was a weight, a promise of consequences. Sofia's pulse raced as she gathered her things. Her steps were quick as she retrieved Ethan and left the tower, the city's lights casting long shadows behind her. Back in Detroit, Sofia sat at her kitchen table, the glow of her laptop illuminating the small apartment. Ethan slept in the next room, his breath a soft anchor. She opened her files, her notes meticulous, each line a step closer to the truth. But the anonymous message echoed in her mind, a reminder that every discovery brought her closer to danger. She typed a message to Charles. "I found more. It's bigger than we thought. Can we meet tomorrow?" His reply was swift. "My penthouse, 7 p.m. Bring Ethan. You'll be safe there." Sofia closed her laptop, her heart pounding. She was no longer just an auditor, a soldier in a war she hadn't chosen, and Charles Walker was her unexpected ally. The next evening, Sofia arrived at Charles's penthouse, a glass-walled haven overlooking Chicago's glittering skyline. Ethan babbled in his carrier, his laughter a bright note in the opulent space. Charles greeted her at the door, his usual suit replaced by a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled to his forearms. The informality softened him, revealing a man who carried burdens as heavy as hers. "You're safe here," he said, his voice a quiet promise. Sofia set Ethan down in a corner where toys had been arranged, a thoughtful gesture that made her chest ache. They sat at a vast dining table, papers spread before them, the city a silent witness beyond the windows. Sofia presented her findings. The payments spanned 3 departments, totaling millions over 2 years. They're routed through ghost accounts, but the approvals trace back to Pierce's team. Charles's eyes narrowed, his fingers tracing a line in her notes. He's building something, either a takeover or a way to cripple biotech. Sofia hesitated and then spoke, her voice soft but firm. He's watching me, Charles. I feel it every day. And the message, it wasn't random. Charles's hand moved toward hers, stopping just short of contact. He said, I won't let him hurt you, his gaze unwavering. But you need to decide how far you're willing to go. Sofia looked at Ethan, his laughter filling the silence. For him, I'll go as far as it takes. Charles nodded, a flicker of pride in his eyes. The air between them thickened, charged with a connection neither dared name. As Sofia left the penthouse, Ethan fell asleep in her arms. She felt the weight of Charles's promise and the shadow of Pierce's threat. The war was no longer just about numbers. It was personal, and she was ready to fight. The Chicago skyline glowed with a restless energy, its towers ablaze under the weight of a late September dusk. Sofia Nelson navigated the Biotech Solutions Tower with a quiet resolve, her security badge a talisman against the whispers that trailed her. Ethan gurgled in the nursery, his tiny hands clutching a toy star as he played, unaware of the storm gathering around his mother. Sofia's office was a haven of focus, her monitors casting a soft glow across her deep brown skin, her curls escaping their bun in defiant wisps. The weight of Edward Pierce's threat hung over her like a storm cloud, his words. Curiosity can be costly, echoing alongside the anonymous message that had chilled her nights. Sofia's work had become a mission, each keystroke a step deeper into the labyrinth of biotech's finances. The vendor payments she had uncovered were no longer mere anomalies. They were a deliberate scheme, a slow poison seeping through the company's veins. The ghost vendor, Apex Innovations, was a facade. Its transactions were carefully orchestrated theft, totaling millions. Sofia traced the funds through shell accounts, her notes meticulous, each discovery a spark in the dark. But the office around her had grown colder, the glances of colleagues sharper, their whispers cutting like knives. She's Charles's favorite, and a single mom in finance. She doesn't belong. The words, laced with racial and class undertones, stung Sofia's pride. But she channeled her pain into her work, her resolve unbreakable. By noon, Edward Pierce escalated his campaign. He appeared in the finance wing, his presence as calculated as his smile. "Miss Nelson," he said, leaning against her desk, his cologne sharp in the air. "You've adapted quickly. Not everyone gets such direct access to our systems." Sofia met his gaze, her voice steady. "I'm doing what I was hired for, Mr. Pierce." His eyes narrowed, the smile never reaching them. "Of course. But access is a privilege, not a right. Be mindful of where you tread." He glanced at Ethan in the nursery, his expression unreadable. "Children are so vulnerable." Sofia's heart thudded, but she refused to flinch. "So, our secrets, Mr. Pierce, they don't stay hidden forever." His mask faltered momentarily, a flicker of unease crossing his face, before he chuckled, the sound low and dangerous. "Bold words, Miss Nelson. I hope you're prepared for their weight." He walked away, leaving Sofia with a racing pulse and a fire in her chest. She sent a message to Charles Pierce. "Just came by. He's pushing harder." Charles's reply was swift. "My office now." The walk to the 75th floor was a gauntlet, the glass walls reflecting her image, a black woman carrying the weight of truth and the burden of suspicion. Charles stood at his window, the city sprawling beneath him in a sea of twilight hues. His navy suit was unbuttoned, his tie loosened, revealing a man worn by the weight of his empire. "What did he say?" he asked, turning to her, his blue eyes sharp with concern. Sofia recounted the encounter, her voice steady, but laced with fear. "He mentioned Ethan. Not directly, but it was a threat. Charles's jaw clenched, his hands balling into fists. "He's testing you," he said, his voice low, edged with fury. "He knows you're close to something he can't control." Sofia slid a flash drive across his desk. "I found more. The payments are routed through ghost logins tied to Pierce's department. He's not just stealing, he's setting up a framework to destabilize biotech." Charles scrolled through her files, his expression darkening. He said this is enough to confront him, but Sofia shook her head. "Not yet. He's too careful. We need something undeniable." Charles looked at her, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. "You're braver than most, Sofia." Her throat tightened, the weight of his words stirring something dangerous, a warmth she couldn't afford to feel. As Sofia prepared to leave that evening, the office felt emptier, the silence heavier. She retrieved Ethan from the nursery, his laughter a balm to her frayed nerves. As she entered the parking garage, a car idled across the lot, its headlights flaring briefly before dimming. Her breath caught the anonymous message echoing in her mind. She quickened her pace, locking her car doors when she and Ethan were inside. Her hands trembled on the wheel, but she drove home to Detroit, the city's lights blurring into streaks of gold and shadow. Sofia sat at her kitchen table in her apartment, Ethan asleep in the next room. Her laptop glowed with data, and her notes showed a map of betrayal. The truth was within reach, but so was the danger. She typed a message to Charles. "I'm not stopping, but I'm scared for Ethan." His reply came instantly. "You're not alone. I'll protect you both." The words were a lifeline, a promise that anchored her. But as she closed her laptop, a new message appeared from an unknown number. "Stop digging, or your son pays the price." Sofia's blood ran cold. She clutched Ethan's blanket, its lavender scent a fragile shield against the fear clawing at her heart. The next morning, Sofia returned to biotech. Her chin lifted despite the whispers that followed her. The office buzzed with a new undercurrent, colleagues' glances, now openly skeptical. She overheard a conversation in the cafeteria. "She's only here because of Walker. Must be nice to skip the ladder." The words burned a reminder of the racial and class barriers she faced. Sofia ignored them, focusing on her work, but the weight of isolation grew heavier. By afternoon, Clara Bennett appeared, her kind eyes a rare comfort. She said, "You're doing better than you think," setting down a coffee. "Don't let the noise get to you." Sofia managed to smile, but the noise was inescapable. Late that evening, Charles found her in her office, the city lights casting long shadows across the glass. "You're still here," he said, his voice soft but heavy with concern. Sofia looked up, her eyes weary. "I can't stop now. Pierce knows I'm close." Charles stepped closer, his presence a quiet anchor. He said, "You don't have to carry this alone." His hand brushing hers for a fleeting moment. The contact was electric, a spark that made her breath catch. "I'm not used to trusting anyone," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Charles's gaze softened. "Then start with me." The air between them thickened, charged with a connection neither dared name. Sofia looked away, her heart racing. She wanted to believe in his promise, but fear for Ethan held her back. As she left the tower, Ethan fell asleep in her arms. She felt the weight of Pierce's threat and the pull of Charles's trust. The war was escalating, and Sofia was no longer just a mother or an auditor. She was a woman standing on the edge of truth, with a man who saw her as more than the world allowed. The city lights flickered below, a reminder that the battle was far from over. But for the first time, Sofia felt she might not face it alone. The Chicago skyline burned with the fierce amber of twilight, its towers casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the city's restless heart. Inside the Biotech Solutions Tower, Sofia Nelson moved through the 40th floor with a quiet defiance. Her security badge, a fragile shield against the whispers that now followed her like a tide. Ethan, her 18-month-old son, played in the nursery, his laughter a bright note against the growing storm. Sofia's deep brown skin caught the soft glow of her office monitors, her curls loosening from their bun in rebellious wisps, her thrifted blouse and blazer, a testament to her resilience in a world that judged her at every turn. The anonymous threats, "Stop digging, or your son pays the price," lingered in her mind, a cold weight that pressed against her resolve. Sofia's work had become a battle, each keystroke a strike against the corruption she had uncovered. The ghost vendor, Apex Innovations, was no longer just a pattern. It was a meticulously crafted scheme, siphoning millions through shell accounts, with Edward Pierce's fingerprints hidden in the code. Her notes, encrypted and guarded, mapped a betrayal that threatened to unravel biotech from within. But the office had turned hostile, the air thick with suspicion. Colleagues' glances were no longer subtle. Their whispers cut through the workplace hum. She's Walker's project, nothing more. And a single mom with that kind of access. Something's off. As a black woman navigating a corporate world built on privilege, Sofia felt the sting of their words, each one a reminder of her outsider status. The morning brought a new blow. As Sofia crossed the lobby, balancing Ethan on her hip, a stranger in a dark coat raised a camera, the click echoing like a gunshot. She froze, her heart pounding as the man vanished into the crowd. When she reached her office, her phone buzzed with a notification, a blog headline glaring across the screen. "Who is Charles Walker's mystery woman? Sources suggest more than professional ties." The article was ruthless, its words slicing through her dignity. Sofia Nelson, a single mother from Detroit, has risen improbably in biotech solutions, reportedly handpicked by CEO Charles Walker. Insiders question her qualifications, hinting at favoritism or worse. The piece mentioned Ethan twisting his innocence into a narrative of opportunism, painting Sofia as a woman who had clawed her way into Charles's orbit for personal gain. Sofia's hands shook as she set the phone down, her breath shallow. The article was no accident. It bore Edward Pierce's calculated malice, a public strike to discredit her and weaken Charles. She wanted to hide, to retreat to the safety of her Detroit apartment, but Ethan's laughter from the nursery grounded her. She was here for him, and she would not break. She sent a message to Charles. "Have you seen the article? They're targeting Ethan." His reply was immediate. "My office now." The walk to the 75th floor felt like wading through quicksand, the glass walls reflecting her image, a woman caught between fear and fire. Charles stood at his desk, his navy suit unbuttoned, his blue eyes blazing with restrained fury as he skimmed the article on his tablet. "This is Pierce," he said, his voice flat but edged with steel. "He's gone public." Sofia's throat tightened, her voice cracking. "They mentioned Ethan and Charles," they called him. She couldn't finish, and the words were too painful to repeat. Charles slammed the tablet down, the sound sharp in the quiet office. "He said they won't touch him," his voice low, unyielding. "Not while I'm breathing." Sofia's breath caught his certainty, a lifeline she wanted to cling to, but fear clawed at her. "This isn't just about the company anymore," she said. "It's personal. For me, for my son." Charles stepped closer, his gaze softening. "Don't even think of stepping back, Sofia. That's what he wants." Her chest ached, the weight of his words mingling with the storm in her heart. "Your reputation," she whispered. "It's bleeding because of me." He leaned forward, his voice fierce yet intimate. "My reputation means nothing compared to protecting you." The air between them thickened, heavy with unspoken truths. Sofia nodded, her eyes burning with tears she refused to shed. "I'm not running," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor within. Charles's lips curved into a faint, proud smile. Good, because we fight this together. That afternoon, the whispers in the office grew louder, conversations halting as Sofia passed. In the cafeteria, she caught fragments of gossip. Walkers defending her publicly. Must be something between them. The words burned their racial undertones sharp. Sofia's blackness and motherhood, a lens through which her presence was judged. She held her head high. Ethan's carrier balanced on her hip, his babbling a reminder of why she endured. But the weight of scrutiny was relentless, and by evening, a new message from an unknown number appeared. You're in over your head. Walk away or it gets worse. Sofia's blood ran cold, her hands trembling as she locked her office door. She drove back to Detroit, the city's lights blurring into streaks of gold and shadow. In her apartment, she sat at the kitchen table. Ethan was asleep in the next room, his plush moon clutched tightly. Her laptop glowed with data, and her notes showed a map of Pierce's betrayal. The scandal was no longer just corporate. It was a war, and Sofia was its unwilling soldier. She typed a message to Charles. Another threat. They're not stopping. His reply came swiftly. Come to my penthouse tomorrow night. We'll plan our next move. You and Ethan are safe with me. Sofia closed her laptop, her heart racing. She was terrified, but Charles's promise was a beacon, a fragile hope in the gathering storm. The next evening, Sofia arrived at Charles's penthouse, its glass walls framing Chicago's skyline in a symphony of light. Ethan babbled happily, playing with toys Charles had arranged in a corner, a gesture that softened Sofia's edges. Charles greeted her in a white shirt, sleeves rolled up, his usual armor stripped away. He said, "You're holding up better than most," his voice warm but heavy with concern. Sofia set her flash drive on the dining table, papers spread before them. The payments are escalating, she said. Pierce is funneling money faster, like he's preparing for something big. Charles's eyes narrowed. A takeover. He wants control of biotech. Sofia hesitated, her voice soft. He's using me to get to you. The article, the threats. It's all to break us. Charles's gaze met hers, steady and unyielding. He won't break us, he said, his hand brushing hers for a fleeting moment. The contact sent a spark through her, a warmth she couldn't afford to feel. She admitted, I don't know how to trust this, her voice trembling. I've been betrayed before Ethan's father left us when I needed him most. Charles's expression softened, a shadow of his pain flickering in his eyes. I lost my sister because I couldn't save her, he said. I won't let that happen to you. The confession hung between them, a bridge across their separate worlds. Sofia looked at Ethan, his laughter a light in the darkness. For him, I'll keep fighting, she said. Charles nodded, his voice low. And for you, I'll stand in the fire. The air thickened, charged with a connection neither dared name. As Sofia left Ethan asleep in her arms, she felt the weight of Pierce's threats and the pull of Charles's promise. The storm had broken, and the world was watching, but for the first time, Sofia believed they might withstand it together. The Chicago night pulsed with a restless energy, its skyline a mosaic of light and shadow that seemed to mirror the turmoil in Sofia Nelson's heart. The Biotech Solutions Tower stood as a beacon of power, but within its glass walls, a war was brewing. Sofia moved through the 40th floor with a quiet intensity, her security badge a fragile claim to a world that judged her at every turn. Ethan played in the nursery, his laughter a defiant spark against the growing darkness. Sofia's deep brown skin glowed under the soft light of her office, her curls slipping free from their bun, her thrifted blouse and blazer a testament to her strength in the face of scrutiny. The scandal that had erupted, the blog article painting her as Charles Walker's opportunist, had spread like wildfire, its flames licking at her dignity and threatening her son. Sofia's work was now a rebellion. Each line of code and ledger entry, a weapon against Edward Pierce's corruption. The ghost vendor Apex Innovations was a meticulously crafted lie, its transactions a slow bleed that had siphoned millions from biotech. Her encrypted files mapped a conspiracy that pointed to Pierce, but the office had become a battlefield. Colleagues' whispers were no longer subtle. They were blades sharpened by racial and class biases. She's only here because of Walker and a black single mom in finance. She's out of her depth. Sofia felt the weight of their judgment, but she channeled it into her work, her focus unrelenting as she traced the final threads of Pierce's scheme. By mid-morning, the scandal escalated. Sofia's phone buzzed with a new headline: Billionaire Charles Walker defends controversial hire amid fraud allegations. The article detailed a press conference where Charles faced questions about Sofia and his unwavering answers. Sofia Nelson is a valued team member. Every responsibility she has taken was at my instruction. The words had stunned the room, tying his reputation to hers in a way that made Sofia's heart ache with gratitude and fear. She sent a message. "You didn't have to do that." His reply was swift. "I did. Meet me tonight. We need to talk." The walk to Charles's office felt like crossing a chasm, the glass walls reflecting her image, a woman caught between courage and vulnerability. Charles stood at his window, the city a sea of light below his navy suit, unbuttoned, his blue eyes heavy with the weight of his decision. "They're coming for us," he said, turning to her. "Pierce leaked the story to destabilize me, using you as the weapon." Sofia's throat tightened. "They're dragging Ethan into this?" she said, her voice cracking. "He's just a child." Charles's jaw clenched, his voice low. "They won't touch him. I'll make sure of it." Sofia's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. "You've put yourself at risk, Charles. Your empire." He interrupted, his voice fierce. "My empire means nothing if it costs you and Ethan." The words were a vow, a promise, that made her tremor. She wanted to believe him, but the weight of the scandal was crushing. "I'm the reason they're tearing you apart," she whispered. Charles stepped closer, his gaze unyielding. "You're the reason I can stand it." The air between them was electric, heavy with a truth neither dared name. Sofia's breath caught, her heart racing as she nodded, unable to speak. That evening, Sofia returned to her Detroit apartment, the city's hum a distant echo. Ethan slept in the next room, his plush star a quiet comfort. She opened her laptop, and her notes were a map of Pierce's betrayal, but the headlines loomed larger. Biotech CEO's mystery woman fraud, or favoritism. The articles exploited her race and status, painting her as an interloper in Charles's world. Sofia's hands trembled as she typed a message to Charles. "This is bigger than me. I don't know if I can keep going." His reply was immediate. "You can. Come to my penthouse tomorrow. We'll face this together." The next night, Sofia arrived at Charles's penthouse, its glass walls framing Chicago in a symphony of light. Ethan played in a corner, his laughter a bright note in the opulent space. Charles greeted her, his white shirt open at the collar, his usual armor softened. He said, "You're stronger than you know," his voice warm but heavy with concern. They sat at the dining table, papers spread before them. Sofia's findings, fragments of evidence that pointed to Pierce's plan to seize control of biotech. "He's not just stealing," Sofia said. "He's positioning himself to take over. The payments are a distraction from something bigger." Charles's eyes narrowed, his fingers tracing her notes. "He's betting on the scandal to force me out." Sofia hesitated, her voice soft. "And I'm the weak link. If I walk away." Charles's hand covered hers, the contact warm and steady. "You're not the weak link, Sofia. You're the one who saw what no one else did." Her breath shuddered the warmth of his touch, stirring something dangerous. She admitted, "I've never had anyone stand up for me like you do," her voice trembling. Charles's gaze softened, a shadow of his own pain flickering. "I've spent my life building walls. You're the first person who's made me want to tear them down." The confession hung between them, a fragile bridge across their worlds. Sofia looked at Ethan, his laughter a reminder of why she fought. "I'm scared, Charles," she said, "not just for me, but for him." Charles's hand tightened on hers. "I'll protect you both. I promise." The air thickened, charged with a connection that felt inevitable and perilous. As Sofia left Ethan asleep in her arms, she felt the weight of the scandal and the pull of Charles's vow. The world was watching its judgment relentless, but in Charles's presence, Sofia found a strength she hadn't known she possessed. The next morning, Sofia arrived at biotech and found her office ransacked. Files were scattered across her desk, her laptop frozen on an error message. Panic surged as she rifled through her papers. The folder containing her most damning evidence against Pierce was gone. She sent a frantic message to Charles. "The files are missing. Someone took them." He appeared in her office within minutes, his expression hard. "This was no accident," he said, scanning the chaos. "Pierce is escalating." Sofia's chest tightened. "What do we do now?" Charles's eyes locked on hers, unyielding. "We fight smarter." That night, they sat in Charles's penthouse, papers spread across the table, Ethan asleep in a guest room. Sofia leaned her head into her hand, exhaustion dragging at her. Charles watched her, his sharp features softened by something unguarded. "You're stronger than you realize," he said quietly. Sofia lifted her eyes, searching his. "And you're gentler than you let anyone see." For a moment, neither looked away, the air charged with a longing neither dared act on. Charles's hand moved toward hers, hesitated, then stopped. "We'll get the files back," he said. "I won't let him take this from us." The way he told it lodged deep in Sofia's heart, a promise that the fire of their defiance would burn brighter than the storm. The Chicago courtroom hummed with a palpable tension that seemed to pulse through the polished oak and marble, its high ceilings echoing the weight of judgment. Sofia Nelson sat at the defense table, her hands clasped beneath the surface to hide their trembling, her deep brown skin catching the cold light of the fluorescent fixtures. Her usually defiant curls were tamed into a sleek bun, her thrifted blouse and blazer a quiet rebellion against the world that sought to define her. Ethan, her 18-month-old son, was safe with a trusted friend in Detroit, his absence a hollow ache in her chest. The past weeks had been a storm. Edward Pierce's leaked documents forged to paint Sofia and Charles Walker as conspirators in corporate fraud had thrust them into a public crucible, their names splashed across headlines that twisted truth into scandal. Charles sat beside her, his navy suit immaculate, his blue eyes steady despite the chaos. Beneath the table, his hand brushed hers, a fleeting anchor that steadied her racing pulse. The courtroom was a battlefield. Journalists lined the back rows, their pens poised like daggers. Spectators whispered, their eyes flickering between Sofia and Charles, some with curiosity, others with disdain. Across the room, Edward Pierce sat with his legal team, his gray suit as polished as his smile, his confidence, a blade honed by years of maneuvering in the shadows. The judge entered her presence, commanding silence, and the gavel struck, signaling the reckoning's start. The prosecution wasted no time. The lead attorney, a man with a voice as sharp as his suit, projected the forged documents onto a screen, spreadsheets with Sofia's credentials, contracts, bearing Charles's digital signature, invoices tied to non-existent projects. "Miss Nelson, The attorney said, his tone calculated. Can you explain these discrepancies, or will you admit to your role in defrauding Biotech Solutions? Sofia's throat tightened, the weight of the room's gaze crushing. For a moment, words deserted her. The accusations a noose around her resolve. But Charles leaned closer, his voice a whisper only she could hear. Steady, Sofia. The truth doesn't need to shout. She lifted her chin, her voice clear, carrying across the courtroom. These documents are forgeries, and I can prove it. A ripple of gasps echoed the journalist's pens, scratching furiously. The attorney arched a brow, his skepticism palpable. And how, Miss Nelson, do you propose to do that? Sofia reached into her briefcase, her hands steady now, fueled by a fire she hadn't known she possessed. For weeks, she had combed through data fragments, piecing together the truth with Charles's resources and the quiet support of a few loyal biotech analysts. Now she laid her evidence before the court, original contracts, with timestamps predating the forgery's email chains, tracing orders to Pierce's private server, and login records showing his ghost credentials. The courtroom stirred a current of shock surging through the spectators. Edward's smile faltered a crack in his polished facade. The judge leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she examined the documents. Sofia continued, her voice steady but fierce. This wasn't about money, it was about power. Edward Pierce fabricated these lies to protect his corruption and destroy anyone threatening to expose him. Charles's hand squeezed hers beneath the table, pride gleaming in his eyes. The prosecution's attorney faltered his composure, fraying as Sofia's evidence unraveled their case. Witnesses took the stand. Former biotech employees, emboldened by Charles's protection. Forensic analysts, confirming the tampering, a whistleblower from Pierce's team who had turned under pressure. Each testimony was a thread pulled from Pierce's carefully woven lies, the fabric of his scheme unraveling. Edward's objections grew sharper, his voice tinged with desperation. But the truth was too loud, too undeniable. Sofia watched him, his sweat-slicked brow betraying the cracks in his armor. She felt no triumph, only a quiet resolve. She was here for Ethan herself, and the man who had stood beside her when the world turned against them. The prosecution's case crumbled by the time closing arguments arrived. Charles's attorney, a woman with a voice like tempered steel, delivered a final blow. Sofia Nelson and Charles Walker are not the criminals here. They are the victims of a calculated betrayal orchestrated by Edward Pierce to seize control of Biotech Solutions. The judge's gaze swept the room, lingering on Pierce, whose smile had vanished entirely. When she delivered the verdict, her voice carried the weight of finality. The court finds Sofia Nelson and Charles Walker not guilty of all charges. An investigation into Edward Pierce will proceed immediately. The gavel struck a sound that echoed like thunder. Sofia's breath shuddered, relief flooding her veins. Charles's hand tightened on hers, a silent vow that they had weathered the storm. The courtroom erupted in murmurs as they rose, cameras flashing like lightning. Edward Pierce stood, his face a mask of rage, his eyes locking on Sofia with a promise of retribution. But she met his gaze, unflinching, her strength forged in the fire of this fight. Outside the courthouse, the Chicago air was crisp sunlight, breaking through the clouds as if the city had exhaled. Reporters surged forward, their questions barraged Mr. Walker. Are you covering up fraud? Miss Nelson? How long have you been involved with him? Sofia froze at the mention of Ethan, but Charles's arm around her shoulders steadied her, shielding her from the chaos. They pushed through the crowd, security guiding them to a waiting car. Inside, Sofia let out a trembling breath, her hands shaking as she clutched Ethan's plush star, a keepsake from the nursery. It's over, she whispered, but Charles shook his head, his voice low. It's not over until Pierce is held accountable. But you did it, Sofia. You turned the tide. Her eyes met his, gratitude and exhaustion mingling. "We did it," she said, her voice soft but firm. The car sped through Chicago's streets, the city a blur of light and shadow. But in that moment, Sofia felt a clarity she hadn't known in years. She was no longer alone. That evening, they returned to Charles's penthouse, its glass walls framing a skyline bathed in gold. Ethan, retrieved from Detroit, slept in a guest room, his laughter a distant echo. Sofia stood on the balcony, the wind tugging at her curls, her heart lighter but still wary. Charles joined her, 2 glasses of wine in hand, his presence a quiet anchor. "To survive," he said, handing her a glass, his faint smile softening the sharp lines of his face. Sofia shook her head gently to the truth. They clinked glasses, the sound delicate, almost fragile, countering the strength that had carried them here. Sofia turned to him, her eyes searching his. "You risked everything. Your empire, your name. Why?" Charles's gaze softened the walls he had built around himself, crumbling in the fading light. "Because somewhere between your first message and this moment, I realized everything I'd built meant nothing without you." Her breath caught tears blurring her vision. The city hummed below, but up here the world was theirs, a fragile space where truth and trust had won. Sofia's heart trembled, not with fear, but with a hope she hadn't dared to feel, a hope that this was only the beginning. The Chicago skyline shimmered under a velvet night, its towers pricking the stars like promises kept against all odds. In Charles Walker's penthouse, the glass walls framed a city that pulsed with life, its lights a testament to resilience. Sofia Nelson stood in the guest room, watching Ethan sleep, his small chest rising and falling, his plush moon clutched tightly. Her deep brown skin caught the soft glow of a bedside lamp, her curls loose and wild after a day unmoored by victory. The courtroom triumph had lifted a weight from her shoulders, but the scars of the battle lingered, headlines that twisted her name, whispers that judged her race, and status threats that had targeted her son. Yet here, in this quiet moment, Sofia felt a fragile peace, a sense that she had reclaimed a piece of herself. The past weeks had been a crucible forging Sofia in fire. Edward Pierce's downfall had been swift. After the verdict, his arrest splashed across news feeds, his polished facade shattered. But the world outside was merciless, its scrutiny unrelenting. Reporters still camped outside Biotech Solutions, their cameras hungry to glimpse Sofia, the mystery woman who had upended an empire. Social media buzzed with speculation, some praising her courage, others questioning her motives, their words laced with the racial biases she had faced her entire life. As a black single mother, Sofia knew the world saw her through a lens of doubt, but she refused to let it define her. She was here for Ethan, for the future she would build, and for the man who had stood beside her when the storm raged fiercest. Charles found her in the guest room, his presence a quiet tide that filled the space. His white shirt was open at the collar, his blue eyes softened by the lamplight, revealing a man who had shed the armor of a billionaire. "He's peaceful," Charles said, his voice low as he nodded toward Ethan. Sofia smiled, her fingers brushing her son's curls. "He's my anchor," she said, her voice soft but steady. Charles stepped closer, his gaze searching hers. "And you're mine." The words were a raw and unadorned confession that made her tremor. She turned to him, her heart racing, the air between them charged with a truth they could no longer deny. They moved to the living room, the city a glittering backdrop beyond the glass. Papers from the trial lay scattered on the dining table, remnants of a battle won but not forgotten. Sofia sat, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, its warmth grounding her. "The world knows my name now," she said, her voice tinged with pride and weariness. "But they don't know me, not the way you do." Charles sat across from her, his eyes never leaving hers. They'll learn, he said. You're not just a name, Sofia. You're a force. Her throat tightened, gratitude and vulnerability tangling within her. I was nobody when I sent that message, she said, just a woman trying to survive. Now I'm in your world, bigger than I ever imagined. Charles leaned forward, his voice fierce yet tender. You were never nobody. You were a mother fighting for her son, a woman who saw truths others ignored. That's why I couldn't look away. Sofia's breath caught his words, a mirror reflecting a strength she hadn't always seen in herself. The conversation turned to the future, a horizon both daunting and bright. Sofia spoke of her dreams to return to school, earn a master's in biochemistry, and build a career that would secure Ethan's future. Charles listened, his gaze steady, a quiet pride in his eyes. I'll support you, he said. Not because I have to, but because I believe in you. Sofia shook her head, a faint smile tugging at her lips. You've already given me so much. I need to do this for myself. Charles nodded, his voice soft. Then do it, but let me walk beside you. The words were a vow, a promise that transcended the chaos of the past weeks. Sofia's eyes burned with tears, not of sorrow, but of a hope she hadn't dared to embrace. She stood, moving to the balcony, the Chicago wind tugging at her curls. Charles followed his presence, a steady warmth at her side. The city stretched before them, a sea of light and shadow, its rhythm a counterpoint to the quiet between them. I used to think love was a luxury I couldn't afford, Sofia said, her voice barely above a whisper. After Ethan's father left, I built walls to keep us safe. Charles turned to her, his eyes reflecting the starlight. I built walls too, he said. After my sister died, I thought power and control would protect me, but they were empty until you. His hand reached for hers, his touch warm and deliberate, a bridge across their worlds. Sofia's breath shuddered, her heart trembling with a truth she could no longer deny. She stepped closer, her fingers lacing with his, the contact a spark that set her alight. You're no longer untouchable? Charles Walker, she whispered, her voice fierce, yet tender. You're mine. He smiled, rare and unguarded, his forehead resting against hers. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Their lips met, soft at first, then deepening with a hunger that spoke of redemption and second chances. The kiss was a promise, a vow that they would face whatever storms came next together. When they parted, Sofia's heart was a symphony of hope and fear, but the fear was quieter now, drowned by the strength of their bond. The city roared below, but up here in the starlit quiet, they had built an empire of their own, not of wealth or power, but of trust and love. The days that followed were a delicate dance. Sofia returned to biotech, her role no longer temporary, but permanent, a testament to her skill and courage. The whispers persisted, but were softer now, overshadowed by the truth of her contributions. Charles faced the board, his position secure, but his focus shifted. He was no longer the solitary titan, but a man who saw his future in Sofia and Ethan. They began to build a life together, not without challenges. The media still watched their lenses, hungry for scandal, but Sofia and Charles faced them with quiet defiance, their hands entwined. Sofia enrolled in night classes, and her dream of a master's degree took shape. Charles arranged childcare for Ethan, ensuring Sofia could focus, but she insisted on paying her own way, her pride a fire that burned bright. They spent evenings in her Detroit apartment, the small space filled with Ethan's laughter and shared meal warmth. Charles, once a stranger in her world, now belonged his presence, as natural as the stars above. They spoke of the future, not a fairy tale, but a journey they would navigate together through the noise of the world and the shadows of their pasts. One night, as they sat on Sofia's couch, Ethan fell asleep in her lap, Charles took her hand, his voice soft. "I never thought I'd find this," he said, "a family, a home." Sofia smiled, her heart full. "I never thought I'd trust again," she said. "But you made it impossible not to." They sat in silence, the Detroit skyline, a quiet backdrop, its lights a reminder that hope could bloom, even in a city of scars. Their love was not perfect. It was tested, scarred, and fiercely honest. An empire built on the courage to choose each other against all odds. If Sofia and Charles's story touched your heart, let us know in the comments. What was your favorite moment? Did their resilience, love, or fight for truth move you? Like this video. If it stirred your soul, share it with those who need a reminder that love can conquer even the darkest storms, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss the next journey of passion and redemption. Your support keeps these stories alive, reaching hearts across the world. Thank you for being part of our community.